If, over the past few weeks, you felt a sudden and unsettling disconnect from your past, there may be a reason deeper than you realize. Maybe certain memories no longer feel emotionally real. Maybe old goals, old relationships, even old versions of yourself now seem strangely distant, as if they belong to someone else entirely. And perhaps the most disturbing part is that you can't fully explain why. But what if this feeling isn't confusion? What if it's evidence? What if the version of reality you were once emotionally connected to no longer exists for you in the same way it once did? This is not simply a motivational idea or a spiritual metaphor. It is a way of understanding consciousness and reality that attempts to explain the strange psychological and emotional dislocation many people experience before a profound internal shift. And in the next few minutes, we're going to explore the signs that this transition may already be happening inside your life. More importantly, we're going to uncover what it truly means when an old timeline closes, and why what feels like a breakdown may actually be the beginning of an entirely different reality unfolding around you. This idea is deeply connected to what is known in physics as the many worlds interpretation, first proposed by physicist Hugh Everett III. According to this framework, every possible outcome of every decision creates a branching reality, a separate timeline where that possibility continues to exist. In other words, there are countless versions of reality unfolding simultaneously, and within each of them exists a different version of you. One thread shaped by fear, another shaped by courage, one built from hesitation, another built from alignment. And while your conscious awareness experiences life as a single continuous path, the larger architecture of reality may be far more vast than it appears. Imagine an immense cosmic tapestry woven from infinite threads. Every thread represents a potential life, a different future, a different identity, a different emotional destiny. The version of you listening to this right now can only see the small section directly ahead. But another aspect of your consciousness may perceive the entire design at once. And this is where the idea of the parallel self begins to emerge. Not as another person walking through another dimension in some science fiction fantasy, but as the higher dimensional aspect of your own awareness, the part of you capable of perceiving patterns, possibilities, and timelines beyond the limits of linear perception. While your conscious mind moves one step at a time through experience, this deeper intelligence sees which paths lead toward expansion and which ones slowly collapse under the weight of repetition, trauma, and resistance. It sees the faded threads you continue holding on to long after they have lost their vitality. It sees the luminous possibilities you are afraid to step toward. And sometimes, when a reality becomes too restrictive, too exhausting, too disconnected from the evolution of your deeper self, something happens. The thread is cut. This is what I call a timeline closure event. Not a punishment, not abandonment, a form of intervention. A decisive shift initiated when a particular version of reality can no longer support your growth. And this is why so many people suddenly experience a strange emotional neutrality toward things that once defined them. Old dreams no longer carry the same emotional charge. Conversations that once mattered now feel hollow. You look at old photographs and feel as if you're observing the memory of another life entirely. The memories remain, but the emotional bridge connected to them has weakened or disappeared. It can feel unsettling, almost like grief for a reality you no longer want back. But here is the strange part. The confusion itself may be evidence that something inside you has already begun transitioning into a different internal state. Your body senses it before your mind fully understands it. Your nervous system begins recalibrating to a different emotional environment, while part of your identity is still trying to make sense of the old one. This creates the strange disorientation many people describe during periods of profound transformation. It feels like emotional jet lag, as if one part of you has already arrived somewhere new, while another part is still unpacking the past. And if you felt this recently, if old identities no longer fit the way they once did, then what you are experiencing may not be a collapse of self at all. It may be the first sign that your reality is reorganizing itself around a different version of you. To truly understand this process, you first have to expand your definition of who you are. The conscious mind, the voice inside your head, the identity you've spent years protecting and explaining, is only one fragment of a much larger field of awareness. Think of yourself as both the traveler and the architect at the same time. One aspect of you walks through the timeline. Another perceives the entire structure behind it. And from that higher perspective, certain realities eventually reveal themselves as dead ends. Not because you failed, but because they can no longer carry the weight of who you are becoming. That deeper intelligence sees when a thread has become weakened by endless loops, emotional stagnation, and diminishing meaning. And when the moment finally arrives, it performs an act of severance. A clean, energetic separation from a reality that no longer aligns with your evolution. The pain that follows often feels deeply personal, but it may actually be the phantom sensation of an old identity dissolving. Like an amputated limb that the nervous system still remembers, your mind continues reaching toward emotional structures that are no longer fully connected to your present reality. And this is why the process feels so strange. One part of you is grieving. Another part already knows the shift was necessary. By the end of this journey, you may begin to see your confusion differently, not as proof that something is wrong with you, but as evidence that a profound internal transition has already begun. Welcome to the beginning of your new timeline. To truly understand why this shift happened, you first have to completely redefine what you believe yourself to be. The conscious mind, the identity speaking inside your head right now, experiences life like a traveler moving through an immense and mysterious landscape one step at a time. But what if you are not only the traveler? What if another aspect of you exists simultaneously as the architect of the entire terrain itself? This deeper intelligence is what many traditions have attempted to describe for centuries. Not another physical being existing somewhere else, but the larger field of awareness from which your present identity emerges. Your parallel self is not a separate person living another life in another dimension. That interpretation is far too simplistic for what this really points toward. It is the total field of your unrealized potential existing simultaneously beyond the limits of linear perception. It is the larger consciousness capable of perceiving every possible path, every branching outcome, every alternate version of your future at once. While your conscious awareness moves along a single thread of experience, this deeper aspect of you perceives the entire tapestry simultaneously. It sees every possibility, every dead end, every future built from fear, every future built from expansion. It sees the worn-out threads weakened by years of repetition, emotional exhaustion, unresolved pain, and diminishing meaning. And from that higher vantage point, it performs something most people never realize is happening. Sometimes a particular reality reaches the absolute limit of what it can offer your evolution. A timeline becomes stagnant. The same emotional loops repeat endlessly. The same fears recycle themselves into new forms. The same inner conflicts continue draining your life force year after year. At that point, the thread no longer supports growth. It begins creating resistance instead of movement. And when this happens, the deeper intelligence behind your experience intervenes. Not randomly, not emotionally, but with extraordinary precision. This is what I call the timeline closure event. A decisive severance from a reality that can no longer carry the weight of who you are becoming. And this intervention is often misunderstood because from the perspective of the conscious mind, it feels like chaos. It feels like confusion. It feels like losing yourself. But from the perspective of the larger pattern, it is an act of preservation, an act of rescue. So the question becomes, if this higher aspect of consciousness is capable of guiding us toward a more aligned reality, why do so many people remain trapped for years inside painful cycles that clearly no longer serve them? The answer lies in the immense power of conscious focus. Wherever your attention repeatedly goes, your inner world begins feeding life into that direction. Every time you endlessly replay an old failure, you reinforce the emotional structure connected to it. Every time you obsess over an old wound, you continue strengthening the psychological architecture of a reality that may already be collapsing beneath you. Most people do this unconsciously because familiarity feels safer than uncertainty. The ego would rather suffer inside a known reality than step into a completely unfamiliar one. Human beings become emotionally attached to their pain because pain eventually becomes identity. They build entire narratives around struggle, limitation, rejection, and survival. In the metaphor of the cosmic tapestry, It is as if the larger intelligence within you is gently trying to guide your hand toward a brighter thread nearby, while another part of you continues gripping the decaying thread of the past with absolute desperation. You hold on to identities that no longer fit. You cling to emotional structures that expired long ago. And through constant attention, memory, and emotional attachment, you continue keeping an old reality alive long after it has already begun collapsing. Think about the goals you once chased obsessively that suddenly feel strangely empty now. Think about the emotional battles that used to consume your mind but no longer carry the same intensity. Most people interpret this as failure or numbness. But what if it is actually the first sign that the old structure is losing its hold over you? Because eventually something inside begins to break. The effort becomes unbearable. The exhaustion reaches its limit. The emotional cost of maintaining the old version of yourself becomes heavier than the fear of releasing it. And this is the moment most people misunderstand completely. The breakdown is not evidence that you failed. It is evidence that resistance has finally exhausted itself. That moment when you felt like you could no longer continue carrying the same emotional weight, that was the opening. That was the point where surrender created space for transformation. This is the central paradox most people never understand. The greatest shifts in human consciousness rarely happen because of force. They happen because force finally collapses. The conscious mind believes transformation comes from pushing harder, controlling more, struggling longer. But the most profound transitions often occur the moment the old structure can no longer sustain itself. The moment you stopped fighting to preserve an identity already dissolving beneath the surface. The moment exhaustion stripped away the illusion of control. That was the signal. That was the opening the deeper intelligence within you had been waiting for. Not because it wanted you to suffer, but because as long as you continued gripping the old reality, the transition could never fully complete itself. The timeline closure event is not an act of punishment. It is an act of extraction, a removal from a collapsing internal architecture before it completely consumes your future. And this changes the meaning of everything you recently experienced. The chaos was not meaningless. The anxiety was not random. The confusion was not proof that your life was falling apart. It was the turbulence created by one reality dissolving while another began assembling itself around you in real time. What you interpreted as destruction may actually have been relocation. You were not being abandoned by reality. You were being repositioned inside it. And once this shift begins, your role fundamentally changes. Your task is no longer to endlessly analyze the old timeline or emotionally resurrect versions of yourself that no longer exist in the same form. Your task is no longer to spend your life trying to repair an identity whose structure has already collapsed. The thread has already been cut. The emotional architecture connected to it has already begun losing coherence, which means your new responsibility is not to repair the past, but to stabilize the present. 2. Begin inhabiting the new reality that has already started forming around you. To align with the direction your deeper consciousness has already chosen long before your conscious mind fully understood why. And perhaps the most important realization of all is this. You are not a victim being dragged through meaningless change. You are the beneficiary of an internal intervention far larger than your current perspective can fully comprehend. What feels like disorientation may actually be evidence that your reality is reorganizing itself around a version of you capable of carrying a completely different future. This was not random. It was not accidental. And it was never happening against you. It was happening for the evolution of the person you are slowly becoming. Now the strange part is this. A shift this profound never happens silently. It leaves evidence behind. Signs. Residue. Psychological fingerprints scattered across your recent experiences. And most people completely misinterpret them. They think these signs mean something is wrong. But what if they are actually proof that the old timeline has already begun releasing its grip on you? The first sign that a timeline closure event has already begun inside your life is something many people mistake for emotional numbness or detachment. But it is much stranger than that. You look back at moments that once carried enormous emotional weight. Heartbreaks, victories, losses, memories that once defined entire chapters of your identity. And something feels different now. The memories are still there. The details remain intact. But the emotional charge connected to them has faded in a way you cannot fully explain. It feels almost as if you are watching scenes from someone else's life. You recognize the person in the memory, but you no longer feel fully connected to them. Have you noticed yourself looking at old photographs recently and feeling strangely neutral toward the version of yourself staring back at you? That sensation is deeply unsettling because part of you expects the old emotional reaction to still be there. But it isn't. And what if this is not evidence of emotional dysfunction at all? What if it is? Evidence that the emotional architecture connecting you to that version of reality has already begun dissolving? When the old timeline loses coherence, the emotional cord attached to its memories begins weakening as well. The events remain as informational imprints, but their ability to emotionally control your present moment starts disappearing. It is as if the footage survived, but the soundtrack was removed. This is why you can suddenly remember experiences that once devastated you without being pulled into the same emotional spiral. It is why you can think about old relationships without feeling the same ache. The event still exists in memory, but its energetic hook inside your present identity has loosened. And for many people, this creates confusion because they interpret the absence of pain as emptiness. But perhaps it is not emptiness. Perhaps it is release. People spend years trying to emotionally free themselves from the gravity of the past. Yet when a timeline closure event occurs, part of that liberation can happen almost instantly. Not because you forced yourself to move on, but because the reality carrying that emotional structure no longer holds the same power over you. You are not losing your mind. You are loosening your attachment to a reality that is no longer fully synchronized with who you are becoming. And then comes the second sign, which is often far more painful. The social shedding. Relationships that once felt inseparable suddenly begin feeling strangely distant. Conversations that used to flow naturally now feel heavy, awkward, almost artificial. There may not have been a betrayal, no dramatic argument, no clear reason for the shift. And that is exactly what makes it so confusing. It feels as though an invisible layer of connection quietly disappeared overnight. You begin noticing that certain people no longer understand the version of you emerging beneath the surface. Interactions begin feeling performative, like both of you are unconsciously trying to continue a dynamic that belonged to another chapter of reality entirely. And perhaps the most difficult part is this. No one is necessarily wrong. No one is necessarily bad. Those relationships were simply built upon an older emotional structure, an older version of your identity, an older internal environment that is no longer fully active within you. When your inner state changes deeply enough, certain connections naturally lose resonance. Not because love never existed, but because the version of reality sustaining that connection has already begun dissolving. It becomes like trying to tune into a radio station that is no longer broadcasting on the same channel. You remember the music. You remember what the connection once felt like. But now there is only static. And this can create an intense loneliness because one part of you still mourns the familiarity of the old reality, while another part of you knows you cannot genuinely return to it anymore. That is the paradox. You miss the people, but you no longer fit inside the timeline they represent. And as painful as this stage feels, it is often evidence that your internal world is reorganizing itself around a different future. The old structures begin fading not to punish you, but to create space for realities more aligned with the person you are becoming. And then something unexpected begins happening. As the old reality dissolves, another force quietly starts moving into the empty space it leaves behind. This is the third sign, synchronic acceleration. Suddenly, the right information appears at exactly the right moment. Conversations seem strangely timed. Opportunities emerge from places you never anticipated. Certain books, ideas, symbols, videos, or people begin entering your life with uncanny precision. A stranger says something that answers a question you never spoke aloud. Someone from your past unexpectedly reconnects with an opportunity perfectly aligned with the direction your life is beginning to move toward. The feeling becomes impossible to ignore. It no longer feels random. It feels orchestrated. Most people call these moments coincidence because the rational mind struggles to explain why reality sometimes begins arranging itself with such unusual precision. But what if synchronicity is not random at all? What if it is a sign that your internal state and your external reality are beginning to reorganize around the same direction simultaneously? As your old timeline weakens, your perception changes. Your awareness becomes more sensitive to patterns, opportunities, and connections that previously remained invisible beneath the noise of survival and emotional resistance. The new timeline begins populating itself. New people appear. New ideas emerge. New pathways reveal themselves. And instead of forcing movement through struggle, life begins responding through alignment. This is why the feeling changes from exhaustion to flow, from pushing to allowing, from desperation to inevitability. The universe is not suddenly rewarding you. It is responding to the version of you now entering coherence with a different future. And this is why synchronicity often accelerates after periods of emotional collapse. The old structures had to weaken first. The old emotional gravity had to loosen before your awareness could fully perceive the new direction unfolding in front of you. Which means the strange timing, the repeated symbols, the unlikely opportunities, the intuitive pulls you have been experiencing recently may not be random at all. They may be evidence that your reality is already reorganizing around a different internal signal. A different version of yourself is beginning to emerge through the cracks of the old identity. So ask yourself honestly, which of these signs have you been judging yourself for? The emotional neutrality toward the past? The fading of certain relationships? The sudden increase in synchronicities that seem almost too precise to ignore? What if these are not symptoms of losing yourself? What if they are evidence that a deeper transition has already begun? And now comes the moment where understanding is no longer enough. Because there is a difference between observing a new reality and fully arriving inside it. So now, for a moment, stop trying to analyze all of this intellectually. Stop trying to force meaning onto every change, every emotion, every strange shift you've experienced recently. Because there comes a point where understanding alone is no longer enough. A point where you stop observing transformation from a distance and begin stepping directly into it. And this is that moment. Find a space within yourself that is quiet enough to listen. Breathe slowly. Let the noise of the day soften around you. Let the constant pressure to explain everything begin dissolving for just a few moments. You do not need to solve anything right now. You only need to arrive. Now imagine yourself standing in a vast space of infinite stillness. A calm darkness stretching endlessly in every direction. Silent, weightless, timeless. And behind you, somewhere in the distance, exists the old timeline. Turn toward it for a moment. Look carefully at it. See it as a single faded thread extending backward into the past. Once it carried your identity, your emotional history, your fears, your attachments, your old dreams. But now something about it feels different. The color has drained from it. The thread appears worn, pale, almost lifeless, like an old photograph forgotten in a box for decades. Reach toward it with your awareness and try to feel its pull. There is almost nothing there anymore. No real gravity. No true vitality. It is only an echo. A residue of something that once defined you, but no longer possesses the same claim over your present reality. And perhaps the strangest realization of all is this. The severance has already happened. The thread was already cut long before your conscious mind fully understood it. That is why the old reality feels so distant now. The emotional bridge connecting you to it has already weakened. Part of you has already moved beyond it. So for a moment, stop resisting that truth. Acknowledge the old timeline for everything it once taught you. The pain, the survival, the confusion, the lessons hidden inside every collapse and every longing. And then gently release it. Not with anger, not with regret, but with the understanding that some realities are not meant to be carried forever. Turn away from it now. Feel what happens inside your body when you stop trying to emotionally resurrect what no longer exists in the same form. And now bring your awareness forward. In front of you hangs another thread entirely different from the first. This one is alive, luminous, pulsing softly like something breathing in the dark. It does not feel heavy. It feels open, expansive, as if possibility itself has taken visible form. This is the new timeline, not a fantasy, not an escape, but a reality that has already begun forming around the version of you now emerging from the collapse of the old identity. And instead of thinking about it intellectually, feel it. Every reality carries its own emotional signature, its own internal atmosphere. So ask yourself quietly, what does this new reality feel like? Does it feel like peace after years of internal noise? Does it feel like freedom after years of emotional compression? Does it feel like clarity finally emerging through confusion? Or perhaps it feels like something even more difficult to describe, a strange sense of coming home to yourself after being psychologically scattered for far too long. Whatever you feel, allow it to deepen. Breathe it in slowly. Imagine that feeling entering your body not simply as emotion, but as information, as a new internal pattern beginning to reorganize your nervous system from within. Feel it moving through your chest, your lungs, your bloodstream, into every part of your body. Imagine every cell slowly responding to this new emotional atmosphere, like an instrument finally being tuned to the right resonance after years of distortion. This is not merely imagination. The body responds to emotional states long before the conscious mind fully understands what is happening. And perhaps that is why your body has felt different recently. Because part of you has already begun adapting to a reality your mind is only now beginning to recognize. Breathe again, deeper this time. Feel your own presence becoming brighter, calmer, more stable. The separation between you and this new reality begins dissolving. You are no longer standing outside it, hoping it arrives someday. You are entering it now. And in this moment, a choice quietly appears before you. Not a dramatic choice, not force, simply a willingness to stop emotionally living inside a collapsing version of yourself. Imagine now taking one step forward. A single step. Feel your feet land inside this new reality. Solid, grounded, real. Let your nervous system absorb the feeling that the shift is not approaching in the future. It has already begun. You are not waiting for the new timeline anymore. You are standing inside the first moments of it. Stay there for a few breaths. Feel the strange familiarity of this new internal space. The calmness, the openness, the absence of emotional struggle. And when you are ready, slowly bring your awareness back to the room around you while carrying that feeling with you. Because that feeling matters more than you realize. Peace, clarity, freedom. That emotional signature becomes your new compass now. Not overthinking, not fear, not survival. Your internal state is what teaches you how to navigate this new reality. Because once the shift happens, your role changes completely. You are no longer someone endlessly trying to survive the old reality. You are now the navigator of a new one. The old role, the version of you defined entirely by struggle, resistance, emotional repair, and constant psychological survival, no longer truly exists in the same way. That reality has already started dissolving beneath your feet. And your new responsibility is different now. You are not here to endlessly fight reality anymore. You are here to stabilize within it, to learn the emotional physics of this new internal landscape, to build a life inside it instead of constantly trying to escape from one. But there is something important you need to understand. Even after the shift begins, echoes from the old timeline may still appear. Sudden memories, random sadness, waves of anxiety that seem to emerge from nowhere. Most people panic when this happens because they think it means the transition failed. But it doesn't. These are phantom echoes, residual emotional patterns from a reality your nervous system is still learning to release. And the mistake most people make is fighting these echoes or overanalyzing them. But attention feeds what you continue engaging with. So instead, a different approach becomes necessary. When an old memory or emotional wave appears, do not run from it, and do not merge with it. Simply notice it. Acknowledge it gently. You might quietly say to yourself, "There is the echo again." By naming it without emotionally identifying with it, you stop reinforcing its authority over your present state. Then release it, not by force, simply by withdrawing your focus and returning your awareness to the physical present moment, the sensation of your breathing, the feeling of your body against the chair, the light entering the room around you. You observe the echo without feeding it. And over time, old emotional structures weaken from lack of attention. This is how the nervous system gradually stops organizing itself around a collapsing identity. And now another practice becomes essential. Stabilization. Every morning before the world begins pulling your attention in 1,000 different directions, sit quietly for 1 minute. Close your eyes and reconnect with the emotional signature of the reality you are now entering. Peace, freedom, clarity. Whatever feeling emerged most strongly during this experience, breathe it into your chest slowly. Let it spread through your body. Then, as you exhale, Imagine radiating that emotional state outward into your environment. Not pretending, not forcing, simply reinforcing the internal atmosphere you are choosing to live from now. Because the more consistently your nervous system experiences that state, the less power the old timeline retains over your perception. This is no longer about escaping your past. It is about teaching your entire being how to live from a different internal reality. And eventually, something remarkable begins happening. You stop feeling like a passenger being dragged through random emotional storms. You begin feeling like the conscious participant in your own transition. Not because you control every outcome, but because you finally stop feeding the reality that was already dissolving beneath you. And that is the moment the shift becomes fully real. And maybe this entire journey was never about becoming someone completely new. Maybe it was about finally releasing the versions of yourself you were never meant to carry forever. The timelines built from fear, the identities built from survival, the emotional patterns that once protected you, but eventually began limiting who you could become. Because the truth is, transformation rarely feels dramatic while it's happening. Most of the time, it feels confusing, quiet, disorienting, like something invisible is slowly rearranging your reality from beneath the surface. But now you understand something most people never realize. The old timeline did not collapse because you were weak. It collapsed because your consciousness could no longer remain confined inside it. And perhaps that strange feeling you've carried recently, the distance from your past, the emotional shifts, the synchronicities, the growing sense that your life is reorganizing itself, was never random at all. Maybe it was the first sign that another version of you had already begun emerging long before your mind could explain it. So as you move forward from this moment, stop asking whether the shift is coming. The shift is already here. Your only task now is to stop looking backward long enough to fully step into it. And if this message reached you at exactly the right moment, then perhaps you were never lost in the first place. Perhaps you were being redirected all along. If this video resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and become part of a growing community exploring consciousness, reality, and the hidden patterns shaping human experience. And before you leave, comment below, what part of your old timeline do you feel yourself finally releasing? Sometimes naming the shift is the moment the transformation becomes real. Until next time, trust the process unfolding within you.